why would you take so long? Were you singing all along, and then all of a sudden you finally did a CD, or?
No, well, since I was 22, I think I was too nervous to do it in front of anyone.
A tiny plastic cassette sat locked in a dark room at Graceland. For over 3 decades, nobody dared to touch it. It held the final secret words of the king of rock and roll, recorded for his 9-year-old daughter. Lisa Marie knew the tape existed, yet hearing her father's voice from the grave was too terrifying to face. For 31 years, she let the tape gather dust. But when she turned 40 on that quiet night, she finally slid the cassette into the player. Her finger hovered, then pressed the button. The voice of a ghost returned. The unmarked key and the velvet box. A heavy iron key clicked inside the lock of a gray metal cabinet in late August of 1977. Only 2 weeks had passed since the world lost its king, and the upstairs rooms of Graceland remained locked from public view, sealed behind heavy wooden doors. An estate lawyer named Joe worked in the dim light of the office while the massive crowds outside the gates finally thinned to a whisper. Joe pulled open the bottom drawer of a steel filing cabinet filled with old tax forms, real estate contracts, and a small leather pouch. Inside that pouch sat a cheap black cassette recorder with its magnetic tape stopped mid-spool, bearing a handwritten label on the plastic that read, "For Lisa." Joe did not press play because he knew the strict legal boundaries of his job and the privacy of the grieving family. Instead, he carried the recorder down the carpeted stairs and placed it into a velvet-lined wooden box. He sealed the box with a heavy wax stamp before locking it inside a private safe in the basement archives. Who had actually put the tape in that drawer? And was it Elvis himself, or had a loyal staff member found it in his final hours? The answer lay in the logbook of the upstairs security guard, which showed that on the night of August 15th, Elvis had dismissed his staff early to spend his final evening alone with his daughter. He walked to his desk, opened the drawer, and took out the recorder because he wanted a raw, private message without the glare of studio microphones. The next morning, the world changed forever, and amidst the chaos of arriving paramedics and screaming fans, the small recorder was entirely forgotten on the desk. A loyal housekeeper eventually moved the device to the filing cabinet to keep it safe from the hands of souvenir hunters who were already hovering around the property. Priscilla Presley was the first to learn about the existence of the tape when Joe showed her the sealed box by the office window. Priscilla touched the cold leather of the pouch but did not open it, choosing instead to carry the news directly to her 9-year-old daughter. Lisa Marie sat quietly in her bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and dolls, trying to make sense of the empty house, when her mother sat on the edge of the bed and told her about the recorded message. The young girl looked down at the floor, did not cry, and surprisingly did not ask to hear the tape at all. Instead, she whispered a single sentence, asking her mother to keep the velvet box locked up and out of sight for as long as possible. Lisa Marie was terrified because she had spent the last 2 weeks watching millions of strangers cry on television while the media turned her daddy into a public product. She was deeply afraid that the voice on the tape would sound like the exhausted superstar, not the gentle father who used to sing to her in the bathroom while she brushed her hair. So, the box went deep into the vault, remaining there through the transition of the estate and the grand opening of Graceland to the public in 1982. As Lisa Marie grew older, the tape became a silent, heavy shadow that followed her through her teenage years and her move to California. On her 18th birthday, she received a formal letter from the estate trustees stating she was now of legal age to claim her father's personal belongings. Her lawyers urged her to listen to the tape, believing it might contain crucial legal instructions or hidden wishes regarding the future of the Graceland estate. Lisa Marie sat in her lawyer's office in Los Angeles, looked at the inventory list, and immediately told them to leave the cassette in the vault. She was 20, then 30, marrying and having children of her own, yet she refused to let the ghost of her father break down the emotional walls she had built. The midnight record on the piano bench. A grandfather clock chimed 3 times in the dark hallway upstairs at Graceland on the night of August 16, 1977. The heavy velvet drapes were pulled tight against the humid Memphis air, shutting out the flashing headlights of fans waiting down on Elvis Presley Boulevard. Elvis sat on a low piano bench, his breathing heavy and uneven in the stillness of his private study. His eyes fell on a blue plastic cup, a half-empty bottle of mineral water, and the small black tape recorder resting on the polished wood of his desk. He reached out with a hand that trembled slightly. his fingers feeling the cold plastic of the record button before he finally pressed it down. The room smelled of stale cherry tobacco, old leather, and the sweet scent of the lemon polish the housekeepers had used on the mahogany cabinets earlier that afternoon. A stack of yellow legal pads sat near his elbow, covered in hurried scribbles, half-finished song lyrics, and lists of phone numbers he would never dial again. He adjusted his heavy blue silk pajamas, the fabric rustling loudly in the quiet space, before he pulled the recorder a few inches closer to his chest. Why did this cheap plastic machine have a tiny strip of blue painter's tape stuck over the battery compartment on the back? His cousin Billy had placed it there 2 nights before to keep the loose plastic door from rattling while they were testing some microphone cables in the basement studio. The red recording light flickered on, casting a faint glow across his face as he leaned closer to the tiny internal microphone. He did not begin with a song, nor did he use the booming, theatrical stage voice that had filled stadiums from coast to coast. Instead, he spoke in a low, gravelly whisper, his accent thick with the dust of Tupelo, Mississippi, as he called out to his daughter. "Lisa, it's Daddy," he began, pausing to clear his throat as the tape hissed quietly in the background. He wanted to tell her about his own fears, his regrets, and the promises he knew he might not live to keep. He spoke about the early mornings in Mississippi when he was just a boy, describing the cold wooden floorboards of his family's small 2-room house and the smell of the pine wood smoke rising from the kitchen stove. He wanted her to understand the world he had come from, a world that existed long before the flashing cameras, the private jets, and the constant wall of security guards. He described the small blue bicycle with the white basket that he had helped her ride down the long asphalt driveway of the estate just 3 weeks prior. "I watched you balance on those 2 wheels, Lisa, and I wanted to run down the hill to catch you, but my knees were just too tired that morning," he whispered into the small plastic grill of the microphone. Did he know this would be his very last night on Earth, or was he simply trying to reach through the noise of his chaotic life? A security guard named Sam stood outside the bedroom door at that exact moment, listening to the muffled murmur of his boss's voice through the thick wood. Sam wrote the time in his daily pocket logbook, noting that the king was still awake and talking to himself at 3:15 in the morning. Nobody knew that Elvis was actively bypassing his managers, his bodyguards, and his lawyers to leave a direct, unedited piece of himself behind. He spoke for nearly 15 minutes, his voice dropping so low at points that the tape barely picked up his words over the steady hum of the air conditioner. The air in the study grew colder as the central cooling system kicked on, sending a draft through the heavy drapes that made the yellow brass lamp on his desk flicker slightly. Elvis paused his recording for a brief moment, his fingers brushing against a heavy silver charm bracelet that lay next to his water cup. This bracelet had been a gift from a fan in Munich, but he had kept it on his desk because the small metal keys hanging from the links reminded him of his old motorcycle locker. He picked up one of the small silver keys, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger as he stared at his own reflection in the dark glass of the window pane. He wondered if his daughter would ever ride those same Memphis roads on a motorcycle of her own, or if she would choose to flee the city entirely to escape his massive shadow. He pressed the recorder closer to his face, his voice gaining a sudden, quiet intensity as he began to speak about his mother, Gladys. He told Lisa Marie about the soft, quiet songs Gladys used to sing to him when he was too frightened to sleep during the spring storms in Mississippi. He explained that those simple gospel melodies were the only things that could still bring him peace when the pressure of the stage became too heavy to bear. "When you get scared, Lisa, and the world outside gets too loud, I want you to close your eyes and remember those old songs we used to play on the piano in the music room," he murmured, his voice cracking slightly on the final syllable. He finished the recording with a quiet, dry cough, pressed the stop button, and slid the small machine into the back of his desk drawer under a stack of personal letters. Within 12 hours, the quiet of the mansion was shattered by the sound of sirens, shouting paramedics, and the frantic footsteps of family members running up the stairs. The cheap plastic recorder stayed right where he left it, hidden beneath a letter from a fan in Chicago and a receipt for a customized motorcycle helmet. It was only when a trusted family friend named Ginger went searching for his medical records that the drawer was opened and the cassette was finally noticed. Ginger did not realize the significance of the tape at first, assuming it was just another of the singer's dictations, or a rough rehearsal of a gospel song. She set it on top of the television set in the corner of the room, where it sat for 3 days while the world wept outside the gates. The plastic casing of the recorder collected a thin layer of gray dust from the open windows, while the summer wind blew the scent of thousands of funeral flowers up to the second floor. It was only when the estate lawyers arrived to secure the room that the tape was placed into the locked leather pouch and carried down to the basement archives. The secret of the midnight recording was locked away, but the physical presence of that tape would soon begin to pull at Lisa Marie as she entered her most turbulent years. The silver key and the Hollywood searchlights. A heavy wooden crate arrived at a gated estate in Beverly Hills on a rainy afternoon in 1998. The crate had been shipped under a false name from a private storage facility in Memphis, Tennessee. Inside, wrapped in thick layers of packing paper, sat a small brass key and a sealed envelope containing a handwritten combination code. Lisa Marie stood in her quiet kitchen, holding the key in her hand as she stared at the shipping label. She had spent years trying to build a career in California, far away from the heavy gates of Graceland and the overwhelming pressure of her family name. Yet, no matter how far she traveled, the physical remnants of her past always found a way to catch up with her. The shipping crate had been sent by her mother's personal assistant, who had recently finished cleaning out a secondary safe in the Memphis mansion. The assistant had discovered a spare metal box containing a direct copy of the original cassette tape. Lisa Marie's heart raced as she realized that the tape was no longer secure in a single vault. If a second copy existed, could a former employee have listened to it, or worse, made a copy to sell to the tabloid press? The thought of her father's final, private words being broadcast on national television was a nightmare she could not bear. She immediately picked up her telephone and dialed her family lawyer on a secure line, demanding to know who had authorized the duplicate. The lawyer explained that her mother had ordered the backup copy made in the late 80s to preserve the magnetic strip before the original tape degraded. No one had listened to the audio during the transfer process, as the technician had been sworn to absolute secrecy under a strict legal agreement. The duplicate had been immediately locked away, untouched and unheard, until the estate cleanup brought it to light. This explanation did not ease the heavy tension in Lisa Marie's chest as she looked down at the brass key. The universe seemed to be pushing her toward a confrontation she had avoided for over 2 decades, forcing her to decide whether to destroy the tape or finally face the voice inside it. She carried the small brass key upstairs to her bedroom and placed it in the bottom drawer of her jewelry armoire, beneath a velvet pouch containing her father's favorite gold rings. For the next 10 years, that key sat in the dark, acting as a silent emotional landmine in her daily life. During her 20s and 30s, the Hollywood searchlights followed her every move, documenting her marriages, her divorces, and her attempts to launch her own musical career. Every time a reporter asked her about her father's legacy, her mind flashed to the jewelry drawer and the key hidden beneath the gold. She felt like an imposter, talking about a legendary figure to the public while refusing to listen to the private message he had left specifically for her. On her 35th birthday, she found herself back in Memphis, standing in the basement archives of Graceland after the last tour group had departed for the evening. The mansion was dark and cold, smelling of old carpet, lemon wax, and the damp earth of the surrounding gardens. She walked down the narrow corridor to the heavy vault door, her boots clicking softly on the linoleum floor. The head archivist stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, as he offered to retrieve the velvet-lined box from the top shelf. Lisa Marie stared at the safe door for what felt like an eternity, her hand hovering near the cold steel handle before she shook her head and walked out into the warm southern night. She was not ready to let the ghost of her father break the delicate peace she had fought so hard to achieve. She knew that hearing his voice would reopen the deep, unhealed wounds of her childhood, dragging her back to the chaotic summer of 1977. She preferred the quiet mystery of the tape over the potential pain of its reality, convincing herself that some secrets were better left in the dark. But as the years continued to pass, the silence of the vault grew louder, and the approach of a major milestone would soon force her to change her mind. The silver player and the turning tide. On the evening of February 1st, 2008, a single candle burned down to its metal wick on a marble kitchen counter in California. Lisa Marie sat alone at her wooden dining table, staring at a small black portable tape recorder she had purchased at a local electronics store earlier that week. The brass key from her jewelry drawer lay next to a glass of red wine, reflecting the soft amber light of the overhead chandelier. On the right side of the table sat the old plastic cassette tape, looking incredibly small and ordinary in the quiet of the empty house. She had officially crossed the threshold of her 40th year, and the weight of her unresolved past was finally too heavy to carry into the next decade of her life. A sudden sharp worry crossed her mind as she picked up the cassette and turned it over in her hands, inspecting the fragile plastic casing. Magnetic tape from the late 1970s was notoriously delicate, prone to sticking, snapping, or losing its magnetic coating after decades of sitting in humid storage vaults. If she pressed the play button, would the aging wheels jam and ruin her father's final words forever? Or would the machine eat the ribbon? She reached out and used the tip of a yellow pencil to manually turn the small plastic gears, checking to see if the tape moved smoothly without any physical resistance. The gears clicked softly in the silence of the kitchen, proving that the internal mechanism was still intact and ready to spin. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the eject button on the tape player, causing the plastic door to pop open with a sharp, metallic click. She slid the cassette into the slot with the exposed magnetic ribbon facing downward, then pushed the door closed until it locked into place with a definitive snap. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the steady low hum of the refrigerator in the corner of the kitchen. She placed both of her hands flat on the cold wooden table, closed her eyes, and took a deep, steadying breath to calm her rapidly racing pulse. She forced herself to lean forward, her finger hovering over the controls before she finally pushed the heavy black play button down. At first, there was no voice, only a deep, rushing hiss that sounded like a distant ocean wave rolling over smooth stones in the dark. A sharp panic hit her chest as she wondered if the tape had been accidentally erased during its long decades in the dark basement vaults. She leaned closer to the small speaker, her eyes watering from the strain of staring at the spinning plastic wheels through the clear viewing window. Then, a sudden scraping sound broke through the static, followed by the distinct rustle of heavy paper sliding across a wooden desk upstairs at Graceland. A heavy, familiar sigh echoed through the kitchen, immediately followed by the sound of a throat clearing with a low, gravelly rasp. "Hey there, Yip Yip," the voice said, using the private childhood nickname that only her father had ever called her when they were completely alone. Lisa Marie pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sudden sob as the warmth of his southern drawl filled the empty room. It was not the polished, energetic voice of the performer who commanded the stage at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. This voice was slow, tired, and deeply intimate, sounding like a man sitting on the edge of a bed in the middle of a sleepless night. He spoke slowly, as if choosing each word with extreme care, knowing that the little girl he loved would be listening to him in a future he would never see. He told her about a dream he had experienced the night before, where he saw her growing up into a strong, independent woman with children of her own. He explained that the noise of his public life was often too loud, making it difficult for him to be the father she truly deserved during the busy day. He apologized for the constant presence of bodyguards, reporters, and screaming fans who constantly pulled him away from their quiet playtime in the backyard. He reminded her of the afternoon they rode golf carts through the hills of the estate, telling her that those private moments were the only times he felt truly free. The tape hissed softly as he paused to take a slow drink of water, the ice cubes clinking against the glass with absolute clarity. Then, the tone of his voice shifted, becoming slightly more serious as he warned her about the dangers of the world outside their iron gates. He told her that people would try to use her name, her money, and her legacy for their own gain once his own spotlight finally went dark. He pleaded with her to trust her own instincts, to stay true to the family values they shared, and to never let the entertainment industry change her heart. "No matter what happens, Lisa, you are a Presley, and nobody can ever take that name away from you," he whispered into the microphone. The tape recorded a sudden gust of wind rattling the window pane in his Memphis study, a vivid detail that transported her straight back to her childhood bedroom. She sat frozen in her chair as the voice began to fade, the pauses between his words growing longer as his physical exhaustion took over. He told her he loved her one final time, his voice dropping to a barely audible murmur before the sound of the recorder clicking off cut the connection. The loud click of the automatic release echoed through her California kitchen, bringing the heavy silence back into the small room. Lisa Marie did not move for several minutes, her eyes fixed on the motionless tape player as the realization of what she had just experienced washed over her. She had spent 31 years running from a ghost, only to find that his final message was a shield designed to protect her from the very fears she had been harboring. The tape had not broken her. Instead, it had put the shattered pieces of her childhood memory back together in a way she never thought possible. She finally understood that her father was not just a tragic icon of rock history, but a deeply loving parent who had tried his best to leave a map for her to follow. She reached out and ejected the cassette, holding the warm plastic against her chest as she looked out the window at the dark California night. The long search for her father's true voice was finally over, but the legacy of that midnight recording was about to shape the rest of her life in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. The gold ring and the quiet jungle room. A small pair of silver scissors sliced through the blue plastic seal of a heavy shipping container in the spring of 2009. Lisa Marie stood in the middle of the jungle room at Graceland, where the green shag carpet and heavy pine carvings always smelled of damp earth and old fabric. She had traveled back to Memphis with a small leather bag slung over her shoulder, containing the portable recorder and the original cassette tape. Her daughter, Riley, stood near the screen door, watching her mother carefully place a heavy gold ring with a green emerald stone onto the wooden coffee table. This was the very room where Elvis used to play his bass guitar late at night, while his friends drank soda and laughed on the oversized sofas. A sudden question rose among the security staff who watched her enter the private areas of the mansion after the gates had closed for the evening. Why had Lisa Marie returned to the estate with the tape instead of keeping it safe in her California home? The answer was tied directly to a conversation she had held with her estate manager, a man named Dave, just 3 days prior to her flight. Dave had warned her that the master vault in the basement of the estate was undergoing a massive structural update to install a new fire suppression system. If she left the tape in California, she feared it would be lost in a household move, but bringing it back to the newly renovated Graceland vault meant it would be preserved in a temperature-controlled environment forever. She sat down on the edge of the low fur-covered chair, her hand resting on the cool metal of the cassette player she had carried from Los Angeles. The room was incredibly dark, save for the single yellow spotlight that illuminated the indoor waterfall trickling water down the rough stone wall. She had decided to play the tape one more time, in the exact house where it had been recorded 32 years earlier. She wanted to hear her father's voice bouncing off the cypress wood walls, matching the physical space where he had spent his final sleepless nights. Her finger pressed the black play button, and the quiet hiss of the magnetic ribbon immediately filled the humid air of the room. The sound of her father's dry cough echoed from the small speaker, sounding much louder and clearer in the empty mansion than it had in her California kitchen. She closed her eyes and let the voice wash over her, listening to him describe the green trees of the Memphis hills and the quiet peace of the early morning hours. In this recording, Elvis mentioned a specific wooden toy chest he had bought for her during his last trip to Hawaii, which he had hidden inside the attic above her bedroom. Lisa Marie's eyes snapped open as she realized she had completely forgotten about the existence of that chest during the chaotic years of her youth. She stopped the tape, grabbed a small flashlight from her bag, and walked quickly up the narrow stairs toward the sealed attic door near her childhood bedroom. The attic was dusty and hot, filled with old trunks, broken light fixtures, and boxes of stage wardrobe that had not been opened since 1978. She walked past a row of old leather boots until her flashlight beam landed on a small, dark wooden crate with brass corners hidden under a yellow canvas tarp. She pulled the tarp away, her fingers catching on the rough wood as she wiped a thick layer of gray dust from the brass clasp. Inside the chest sat a small collection of personal treasures her father had gathered during his final months, including 3 framed color photographs of her as a toddler on the beach. There was also a small pocket watch with a cracked glass face and a note written on the back of a concert ticket from 1977. The note simply read, "For my little girl, when she is ready to remember." Lisa Marie held the pocket watch against her palm, feeling the cold weight of the metal, as she realized her father had been preparing for his departure far longer than anyone had ever admitted. She carried the wooden chest back down to the jungle room, placing it next to the velvet-lined box that had held the cassette tape for so many decades. She realized that the tape was not just a message of farewell, but a key that had unlocked a hidden vault of memories she had spent her life trying to block out. Her daughter Riley sat beside her on the sofa, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the Hawaiian chest as they looked through the old photographs together. For the first time in over 30 years, the memory of Elvis Presley did not feel like a heavy burden or a tragic headline. It felt like a quiet blessing inside his own home. She carefully wrapped the cassette tape in acid-free paper, placed it back into the velvet box, and handed it to the head archivist to be locked inside the new basement safe. She knew she would never need to press play on that tape again, as the words had been permanently burned into her mind during that long night in California. She had found the closure she had been searching for, hidden inside the static of a cheap plastic cassette and the dusty corners of her childhood home. As she walked out of the mansion and into the cool Memphis night, she felt a sense of freedom she had not known since she was a 9-year-old girl playing on the lawn. Lisa Marie Presley spent over 30 years running from a ghost. In the end, a simple plastic tape proved that the king of rock and roll was just a father who loved his daughter. She finally found the peace she deserved, tucked away in the quiet corners of Graceland. What would you do if you found a secret message from someone you lost? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to uncover more hidden history and untold stories from television and music, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We will see you in the next video.